welcome to the Advanced Placement World History Podcast. This is episode 4, an introduction to the classical civilizations. The first civilizations that we looked at generated the most impressive human societies created up until that point. But what we need to know about them was that they all collapsed eventually. Mesopotamia, which was always sort of in a state of conflict anyways, was absorbed into larger empires, namely the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Egypt would fall to foreign invaders, notably Alexander the Great eventually, and later the Roman Empire. Indus Valley, it was environmental collapse, there's deforestation that brought about an end to that civilization. In China, you saw the collapse of the Zhou dynasty into a period of chaotic infighting, or the Warring States period. The Olmecs in Mesoamerica abandoned their cities for some reason. Historians are a bit puzzled about it. So, despite how powerful all these civilizations seemed at the height of their power, they would all eventually collapse. But after the first civilizations, there was no going back. People weren't going back to being hunter-gatherers. So, while specific civilizations collapsed, civilization persisted, lived on. And between the years 500 BCE and 500 CE, we have new civilizations popping up, replacing the old civilizations in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, in China, India, Mesoamerica, and South America. Now, these civilizations, 500 BCE to 500 CE, are either called the second wave civilizations or, more commonly, the classical civilizations. And I'll talk a little bit about that name, classical civilization. Why are these the classical civilizations? Okay, so we'll talk about that in a bit. So first I'll talk a little bit about continuities and changes, what changed with these new civilizations and what stayed the same. From a broad view, it doesn't seem like these classical civilizations are really all that different from the first civilizations. States and empires would rise, they would expand, they would collapse. It's really hard to keep track of who was in power, where, and when. These classical civilizations, they're ruled by kings, they're dominated by men, women were oppressed, and there's a major divide between rich and poor, and everyone practiced slavery. So, on top of all that, there's no single major technological breakthrough, nothing on the scale of the agricultural revolution before it, or the industrial revolution that'll happen after it. So you have an early civilization like Egypt, and that had a lot more in common with the classical civilizations with Rome or Greece or Persia or Han China than it had with hunter-gatherers. So it had a lot more in common with the classical civilizations that came after it than the hunter-gatherer societies that came before it. With all that said, there were changes. Population grew faster between 500 BCE and 500 CE than at any other point in human history up until then, but it fell off pretty dramatically after the classical civilizations. For reasons that we're going to look at, to give you a hint, the period in Europe after the classical civilization is popularly known as the Dark Ages, so some bad things probably happened there. So, although there was a huge population growth between 500 BCE and 500 CE, there was actually no population growth between year 1 and year 1000. So the population of the Earth was the same at the beginning of the first millennium as it was at the end of the first millennium. The empires in the classical civilization period were bigger than any of the early civilizations. You have the Persian Empire and Alexander the Great's empire, the Roman Empire, the Han dynasty in China. These were huge empires. The Maya in Mesoamerica, much more renowned today than the Olmec. So, on top of these empires being bigger, the makeup of these empires was different as well, because they typically brought together a wide range of different people under the rule of one government. So, that's why we have some of the best Roman ruins not in Italy, but in Greece, or in the Middle East, or in North Africa. Now, There were major cultural and philosophical developments during this time. We see a ridiculous amount of world religions and belief systems pop up between the years 500 BCE and 500 CE. So we see Greek rationalism, rational thought, Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, all that stuff, product of the classical period. Islam comes about 100 years later. All these traditions, or many of these traditions, endure into the present day. And during this classical period, we also see the emergence of far more widespread and dense networks of communication. So long-distance trade really begins to pick up, and we'll focus on three trading networks in particular: the Indian Ocean Basin, the Silk Road, and the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. So trade really brought the world closer together, and along these trade routes, things spread. And not only the things you might expect to spread. So, yeah, the technology spread, but germs spread, and ideas spread, religion spread. So the next 3 weeks are about the 1,000 years from 500 BC to 500 CE. The classical period, called the classical period because many of its traditions have endured into modern times and still exist in 2011. Confucianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, all that stuff took shape. It's still around today. So despite all the changes in the world over the past couple thousand years, the majority of the people in the world still follow, or say they follow, these traditions that were established during the classical period. So this podcast will be our introduction to the classical period, and we're going to take our first look at Greece, Persia, the Roman Empire, and Han China here. And over the next 2 weeks, we'll take a more in-depth look at some of the issues in this period.